Why are we insisting on the word happiness? Because we're thinking long-term here. We're thinking about a revolution in the way people think about the good life. A revolution in terms of the way people think and pursue life's ultimate currency, happiness. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome from Mexico and Brazil and Portugal and the United States, Ukraine, Boston, New Jersey, Mexico City, Israel, Colombia, France, Los Angeles.
Peru.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's wonderful to see you here. So we have a very, very special and exciting session ahead of us. Just to give you a bit of context, for those of you who are with us for the first time, the Happiness Studies Academy hosts leading thinkers and leading practitioners in the field of happiness studies or related fields, people who are spreading goodness and happiness in our world. And today we have a person who has been spreading goodness and happiness in our world for years and years. I've been following his work, reading his books for decades. It's Professor Raj Sisodia. He's the FEMSA Distinguished University Professor of Conscious Enterprise and Chairman of the Conscious Enterprise Center at Tec de Monterrey in Mexico. Raj is also the co-founder and chairman emeritus of Conscious Capitalism Incorporated. He's published 15 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Conscious Capitalism, back in 2013. I remember when it came out. More recently, The Healing Organization, and his latest book is Awaken, The Path to Purpose, Inner Peace, and Healing. And today we'll talk about conscious capitalism, purpose, inner peace, and healing. Raj has also consulted with and taught at numerous companies, including AT&T, LG, Kraft Foods, Whole Food Market, Tata, Siemens, Volvo, IBM, Walmart, and many more. Raj, it's so great to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Tal. I've, of course, been a huge fan of your work, and the impact that you have had has been extraordinary. And it's been a delight getting to know you over the last few years at some of these World Happiness Summits, especially where we have spent time together.
Yes, this was a real treat, and I look forward to getting to know you a little better today. And here is what we'll do. So I'm gonna just ask you a few questions, and we'll go on for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for questions from our participants. If you want to ask a question, put your hand up through below. You can go to reactions and then go to the yellow hand and just put your hand up if you have a question, and we will call on you, and hopefully we'll get through as many as have their hands up in the following 30 minutes. But let's begin. So Raj, many questions. I could start with your latest book, but I actually want to go back to, I must say, where I first read and was very deeply impacted by your work on conscious capitalism. So first of all, if you can maybe explain to us, what is conscious capitalism, and why did you start it as a global movement, which it is today, with our conscious capitalism centers in, I don't know how many countries, but basically wherever I go, I encounter one. Why? What is it?
Yeah, so conscious capitalism is a philosophy. It's an idea. It's a movement of business leaders who think that there should be something more to business than the way that we have been taught in business school and the way that it's been practiced for quite a while. That human consciousness is evolving over time, And that's our entire journey on this planet, I believe, is one of gradually waking up to realize our greatness, our divine potential, all of the extraordinary qualities that we are endowed with. But in many ways, we have been stuck with the lower consciousness when it comes to business. We kind of got frozen in time where it was only about making money, that business exists, that every other profession exists for something noble in the world, right? The legal profession is about justice, and the education is about wisdom and knowledge, and the medical profession is about our health and well-being. But somehow business is only about making money, that we are the mercenaries off in the corner. And I think that that mindset and belief can become self-fulfilling when we are taught that the only purpose of business is to make as much profit as possible, which is what Milton Friedman essentially said in an essay in 1970, which kind of turned the tide towards this even in a more dramatic way. That the only social responsibility of a business is to increase its profit. So I found that, as I got into business school, I did my MBA in India, then a PhD at Columbia in New York, 6 years of business education, and I found that it was all about the head and the wallet, right?
Mm.
It was all about the numbers and the analytics and the models and the theories, and ultimately everything had to go to the bottom line. That nothing mattered unless it contributed to the bottom line. And for me, it felt like it completely bypassed the human in between, the heart and the spirit. What makes us human, right? It's not just our mind and our wallet, much more. It's what's between. And so I would say, never inspired a single day in my business education, and I was never emotionally moved. It didn't touch my heart in any way. And that was true for those 6 years and for the succeeding 20 years. But I had this latent sense of dissatisfaction and really a sense of, I was searching for meaning and purpose, although I didn't know it. I didn't have the language. But I knew that what I was doing wasn't satisfying. That, especially as a professor of marketing, you come to this country and it's like an avalanche or tsunami of marketing, right? We were spending $1 trillion a year on ads and coupons and junk mail in 2004. And the GDP of India that year was $700 billion. So we were spending more here for 300 million people on ads, coupons, and junk mail than 1 billion people were living on, in India. And I said, wow, what are we getting for that, for customers, for
Mm.
companies, society? We must be like in heaven with all of that money, right? And I found that no, customers are getting sicker and physically, mentally, emotionally, and they don't trust anything to do with marketing. Even as we spend more and more money to try to manipulate them into doing things, companies get lousy returns because 99% of those ads are never seen and 98% of the coupons are never redeemed. And society is being hurt. We're creating a culture of just consumption, and we're chasing after, one of my favorite quotes is John Updike, who said, America is a vast conspiracy to make you happy. Okay. Now think
Mm.
about that. A vast conspiracy to make you happy, which means, any pleasure you seek is literally within arm's reach now, right? You can press a button on this phone and get it, whatever you want. And therefore you should be the happiest people in the world, and yet we're not, right? Ramdas said we thought if we had more that we would be happier. We have much more, and we are not happy. So there was a false promise behind all of it. And it just felt like a kind of mania and craziness. It didn't help that my inner dialogue was that my father got a PhD in agriculture science and he wanted to cure world hunger. He had a noble dream. And I got a PhD in marketing, and I'm just out here selling more junk, right? A bunch of stuff people don't need. And so I had that hunger because I was an idealistic kid. I really wanted, the world to be a certain way. And I mean, it really broke my heart to see the way in which we use women's bodies to sell products, for example. And we think that's perfectly fine because somehow at some level it seems to work. But yeah, what is it doing to the psyche of young women and leading, to eating disorders and body dysmorphia and depression and the aggressive marketing of junky things to cereals, to children, getting them hooked on back. So I was doing what Andrew Harvey said, follow your heartbreak. These things that I noticed that none of my colleagues noticed or cared about, or very few did. But for me, they were really significant, and I had a sense of shame. And I
Mm.
really actually started a book called The Shame of Marketing because I was looking at all of those things. I was indicting marketing for all those negative consequences. And I said, we are spending a ton of money, and yet customers are alienated. Most of them don't trust any of it. You cannot buy love and you cannot buy trust. And yet we're out there spending $1 trillion trying to do that. So I said, let me look for companies that actually are loved and they don't spend all that money because you can't buy that. And so my mentor told me, Raj, people want to hear about the solution and not the problem. So he said, let's change the title from the shame of marketing and let's call it in search of marketing excellence, which
Mm.
means we're really delighting and pleasing our customers. And so I said, okay, let me do that. Let me find companies. And so I started to look for companies that don't spend on marketing and yet customers love them. And I soon discovered a whole other way of being. Companies like Whole Foods and about 28 companies ultimately that I found. Not only do their customers love them, but employees love them and communities embrace them and
Mm.
suppliers were loyal to them. So everybody loved them, right? And so that book ended up being Firms of Endearment, how world-class companies profit from passion and purpose, and companies that are loved, and I said, how does that happen? And then I discovered what we now refer to as the four pillars of conscious capitalism. What was common to these companies, they all had a sense of purpose. They're trying to do something meaningful with the business. They're trying to reduce people's suffering in some way. They're trying to bring some joy into the world. They're doing something beyond profit. Their reason for being. Just like all of us, I'm sure, on this call have all thought about our life purpose. Secondly, they care about all their stakeholders. They don't think about using employees and using customers to make money. They think about how can I serve all of them and enhance the life of everybody I touch. So we measure success by the way we touch the lives of people. And then, we have conscious leaders who care about the people and the purpose. They're not just about power and ego and money. They have kind of transcended that narrow self, an egoic self, and a caring culture. Most cultures have a lot of fear and stress. We've got heart attacks are 20% higher on Mondays. We have all kinds of terrible statistics about the impact of our way of working. 600,000 Chinese die from too much work. This is why I wrote the Healing Organization. The way we work is causing so much suffering. But we discovered these four pillars. And
Sorry,
then we also,
Raj,
yeah,
what's the fourth pillar? So I have purpose,
caring culture. It's because most cultures are filled with a lot of fear and
caring
stress.
culture.
We
Yes.
use the metaphor of carrots and sticks. We think managers are supposed to be good at using carrots and sticks to motivate people, right? But we say what animal belongs between a carrot and a stick? It's not a human, it's a jackass. Okay, we should not be treating people like that, right? People should be intrinsically motivated. People should be inspired to do what they're doing, not acting out of fear or greed, which is what a carrot and stick is, right? And so I discovered these four pillars, and then we did the financial analysis at the end, which was unusual because many of these business books that are looking at some principles, how can we learn? They start with some very, very successful companies and they say, what are they doing? I started with companies that are loved by everybody. I said, how do they do financially?
Mm-hmm.
Given that they're paying their people much better, like Costco was paying double of Walmart and providing 98% of healthcare costs. Walmart wasn't doing the healthcare or paying them well. Investing in their customer experience, they're paying their suppliers well, they're investing in their communities, they're investing in the environment, and they were even paying taxes at a higher rate. So I said maybe investors get less because investors get paid last, right, after everybody else. And what I actually found was that these companies had outperformed the market by 9 to 1 over 10 years. That they were extraordinary in terms of financial performance, even while they were not actually trying to maximize financial performance. It's like happiness, right? Viktor Frankl said, happiness cannot be pursued, happiness ensues. It is the outcome of living a life of meaning and purpose. Same thing, you could say profit cannot be pursued, profit ensues. It is the outcome of the same things, right? Having a business that is based on meaning and purpose, a business built on love and care, and a business that grows in times of adversity. So we found that this became a very compelling story at that point because it's not a trade-off between being nice and being successful. It's saying that the way to be truly successful, these are what I call true profits. There are many other companies that make what I call false profits. Because if you think business is only about profit and profit equals revenue minus cost, then it's pretty simple, right? You maximize revenue, sell as much, charge as much, whether people need it or not, trick them into buying it, and minimize your costs. Pay your people as little as possible, externalize costs onto society, squeeze your suppliers, damage the environment, leave a bill for future generations to deal with, and you've made your profit. Well, I said that is not a real profit. That is, that's not a real business. That is a
Mm.
parasite. A parasite, you're sucking the life energy out of people and out of the planet and out of other things and keeping it for yourself. A true business kind of magically creates value for everybody. Yet everybody's better off, right? In all of those dimensions. So that kind of became
Mm.
the root of it. And then John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, read that book. That was one of the companies I had written about. And he loved it. And he reached out to me and said, I would like to spend some time. So I spent a day with him. And at the end of that day, I shared my vision for what I was calling at the time the Institute for New Capitalism, because I said, John, I've never been taught that you can do business in this way. We were taught a particular way of doing business in business school. And I want to spend the rest of my life to spreading this message, because I remember the
Mm.
distinct moment while I was writing Firms of Endearment, I literally had tears in my eyes as I'm
Hmm.
writing stories. And I said to David, my co-author, I said, David, I've never had tears of joy connected to my work. I've
Mm.
often experienced anger and frustration and disappointment, but my body is telling me something that this really matters. I had not cried for 20 years before that, okay, for various reasons. I was
Wow.
emotionally for personal reasons. But suddenly my heart was cracked open by a story about a business doing
Hmm.
some deeply caring, humane things. And I said, this, for the first time, I feel emotionally touched and inspired in my work. Okay. And so I want to dedicate the rest of in that instant, my purpose kind of landed on me. So John
Mm.
looked at my mind map and said, that's exactly my vision, but I like the phrase conscious capitalism, which had been coined by Mohammed Yunus, who created the Grameen Bank micro lending idea in Bangladesh. But he was using it in a narrower sense. So yeah, that's when we said, okay, let's try to create a movement around this. And so a few months later, we had a gathering at his ranch, about a dozen people. And then October of 2008, we had our first conference in Austin, Texas. And it was the most inspiring and moving and beautiful 3 days of my life until that.
Wow.
Mhm. And it was
What
just,
Raj, what I found so compelling about your work on conscious capitalism and about the story that you shared with us now is that an automatic reaction to what you saw around you could be, and it often is, let's throw capitalism out the window. So, capitalism just doesn't work because it doesn't fulfill human needs. You didn't do that. You
no.
kept capitalism. You didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, and you augmented it. You enhanced it. And I think it's a very important lesson, and especially in today's world where there is so much of the cancel culture. Oh, I don't like something, out, canceled. Instead of let's work with what is working and let's fix what is not, rather than immediately revolutionize and change it completely.
Yeah, that is such an important point, Tal, because it's all about consciousness, right? So we had a certain consciousness when we thought about work and thought about business in the past that gave us many benefits. I mean, you look around and so many things here, the gift of capitalism, but it came at a tremendous cost, right? To people's well-being, to the planet, to other species, to our futures. And so now with higher consciousness, we can say capitalism is probably the greatest idea humanity has ever had for mass levels of cooperation to achieve extraordinary advances. And that's a fact. In the last 200 years, per capita incomes have gone up 3,000%, compared to being flat for millennia. Life expectancy has more than doubled. Literacy has gone up. Our human population has grown eightfold. And there are many things that many people's lives have been uplifted because of this idea of free markets and free people. That freedom leads to prosperity. I mean, what a beautiful insight, because human beings want to be free and we also want to live somewhat prosperous lives, right? And those two things go together. That was Adam Smith's great insight. But if you only make it about material prosperity and if everybody's pursuing their own individual interests, and we think somehow that's going to add up to societal and planetary flourishing, it doesn't. So we have to apply higher consciousness. So what I say is we need to celebrate and elevate capitalism. Otherwise, we will decimate it. Because if we don't elevate it, then we see all of the populist leaders being elected out there. We see what happens in Venezuela, and they went back to socialism, and we saw what happened in Cuba. It used to be capitalist, and there were 36 times it's been tried where, because capitalism went so far in that sort of predatory mode, that there was too much suffering for ordinary people, and there was a revolution, and for a while that feels good, and then ultimately you end up with a system that is even worse, with
Mhm.
no freedom and no prosperity, right? And a government controlling every aspect of your life. It's brutal, as we've seen in time and again. So yeah, it has to be elevated. Again, it remains at its root an extraordinary idea.
Yeah.
The freedom to pursue your passions and dreams and create something. But if you do that not from a sense of I want to be the next Elon Musk, but to say, yeah, I want to be the next person who invented penicillin, or I want to change the world, I want to uplift humanity, I want to secure a future for all of us, on this planet. Those are much more meaningful things. We act like money is the only game in town, there are many games in town. Okay. And we have, especially I think in our culture here in the US, we have become so much about that. It's about the American dream was so framed in material terms that I think we kind of lost sight of what really matters in life.
Yeah. Amazing. You know, there's a story about the Quakers who came to America, you know, who hundreds of years ago, and they say about them that the Quakers came to America to do good, and they ended up doing well.
Mhm.
And I think this is the idea at the core of conscious capitalism. It's about doing good and doing well. And this and is very meaningful. You know, in our courses at the Happiness Studies Academy, we often refer to words by Collins and Porras, who
Mhm.
wrote a book you're very familiar with,
Built
Built
to
to
last.
Last. And they write there that the visionary organizations, the most successful, effective organizations do not succumb to the tyranny of the or, but rather they embrace the genius of the and. So they're not saying, well, one company, we empower people or we micromanage. Well, there are times when we empower, and there are times when we need to micromanage, or we're focusing just on the positive or
Mhm.
just on the negative. No, sometimes we focus on the full part. Sometimes we look at the problems and mistakes. And the genius of the and is very much present in when I look at your work, throughout your work, because it's about doing good and doing well. It's about capitalism. It's about profits and it's about purpose. It's about, and you mentioned it. You use the word. It's about being emotionally moved
Mhm.
and rationally sound. It's not
Mhm.
we're an emotional company, but we don't think about, we don't bring reason into the equation. We have the genius of the and.
Yes, and absolutely. I feel like my whole life has been about that. And I'm actually working with Barry Johnson, who's the founder of polarity mapping, and a book called And, which is precisely about
Oh,
that. So many things in life are
right.
polarities, right? We think it's either this or that. Even conservative and liberal are polarities, right? But there's a reason why
Mm,
each of them exists. There's a gift of conservatism and there's a gift of progressivism. But when you only look at one or you focus on one and you make the other bad, then you end up with the downside of that because you go too far. Likewise, masculine and feminine. We've lived in a world dominated by man and masculine energy for millennia and a patriarchy. And so some people want to go all the way to the other side and say, discard all of that, and we just need purely feminine. Well, what happens if you only have feminine and no masculine? You end up with the hyper feminine, right? And the unhealthy versions of that.
mm,
So love and compassion and caring and empathy can become sentimental and needy and
amazing.
dependent, all of that. Likewise, on the other side, right? So we need to integrate the polarities and be able to get the best of both of them, right? The upper side of each without the downsides of either. And that's really what polarity mapping allows you to do. And same thing with conscious capitalism, in a way, is a integration, because if you think about what does capitalism promise, it's dynamism, right? We're going to have innovation and creative destruction and new things and all that. And it delivers on that. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Socialism promises decency. Everybody's going to have a house, everybody's going to have food, right? But it has not been able to deliver on that because it ends up being dividing up a shrinking pie over time and becomes the equal sharing of misery. And over time, it cannot sustain itself. But people we're human beings, right? We want decency, but we cannot live without dynamism. We're going to have to reinvent
Mm,
every aspect of our life on this planet in this century. Everything that we do has to be done in a different way. That cannot come without innovation and dynamism. So we need dynamism and we crave decency. And why do we have to choose? And we say, actually, no, conscious capitalism will give us greater dynamism because people are more engaged and more passionate about their work and they're going to do even greater things with true decency. People are treated with respect and dignity and paid well and provided good benefits. It's not a
mm,
free handout. It robs people of dignity or of their sense of self when you just give them a handout and they become purposeless, right? And unhealthy. So it really is a blending of those things. And I think there's so many. Yeah, we could go on for an hour just about that, right? Justice and mercy. If you only care about justice, and soon it's an eye for an eye, and everybody's blind, and we're stoning women for adultery, like that happens in some part of the world. we have to temper justice with mercy. In our country, I was hearing Senator Raphael Warnock's brother got a life sentence in prison for a possession of a small amount of drugs when he was young. Okay. And he's serving out a life for something that's probably not even illegal today. I mean, that's the kind of extreme that we go to when we say, oh, this is like throw away the key, 3 strikes and you're out. All of that. So yeah, we have to integrate both sides and see the beauty and the wisdom on both sides and rise to higher ground where in fact it's not either or, but it's and.
Yeah. It's reminds me of the work of the German philosopher Hegel, who says that progress comes when we have a thesis, antithesis, and then a synthesis. And then that synthesis become a new thesis. And there is an antithesis and again, a synthesis. That's how progress, how growth comes in history, as well as in an organization, as well as on the individual level. And Raj, I'd like to move to the individual level before we open it up for questions. You see, in our programs, we talk about macro happiness and micro happiness. Just like in a program in economics, you talk about macroeconomics and microeconomics. So we talk about happiness of nations, of organizations, macro happiness, and micro happiness, families, relationships, individuals. So conscious capitalism is very much about the macro. Now, your latest book, in fact, is very much about micro consciousness and micro growth. You wrote about your journey called Awaken. And tell us a little bit about this. What is your book about? Awaken, the path to purpose, inner peace, and healing. What did that look like?
Yes. So, for me, I mentioned that moment in Pennsylvania at the Poconos when my purpose kind of found me. I think it was June 12th of 2005 when I had tears in my eyes, right? So that was the beginning of my discovery of purpose. So I had been following my heartbreak and now I discovered my bliss. Joseph Campbell talks about follow your bliss, right? That's what you're meant to do. And I think somewhere between your heartbreak and your bliss lies your purpose. So at that point onward, I was on fire with my purpose, right? We started conscious capitalism. I became kind of the thought leader and the chief evangelist. And they gave me once an enormous Energizer bunny, literally. They said, "You're the Energizer bunny of conscious capitalism." Because I was on the road 80% of the time. I was literally giving 80 to 100 talks a year.
Wow.
Okay, all over the world. I was flying from Korea to Brazil to Berlin and then here and there. I mean, I was, nuts. But I was fueled by this desire to make a difference. And we had a compelling and powerful message, and I just wanted to get it out there. But I found, well, two things. So I was incredibly fulfilled professionally. Before that, I was fulfilled in no aspect of my life. I was very unhappy at home and I was very unhappy professionally, right? I was ashamed of my own profession. But now I had this great energy and enthusiasm and sense of purpose and belief in my work. Uh, but to the point where I was burning myself out and I had no balance in my life. I wasn't paying attention to my physical, mental, emotional, psychological well-being. I had my spiritual well-being was great because I had meaning and purpose, right? But I was kind of running away from home in many ways. My sanctuary was the airport and the airplane and the United Club and, all the places I went because I was deeply unhappy in my own life. And so what I've realized in looking back, and the journey to this book really started in 2019 when I was writing the Healing Organization. And I turned 60 that year. And in 2018, I'm sorry, in 2018, I was writing that book and I turned 60 that year. And I was like, in those days, I was like, one book has not even come out in print yet. And I'm already, oh my God, what am I going to do next? And I need to write. So I'm like jumping from project to project and airport to airport, almost like a panicked sense of urgency and not really taking a lot of joy in it, just feeling like looking at what's not done. So I was in that mode. I had done my interviews, I had identified the companies, and I said, okay, the entire summer is now a series of writing retreats, and I'm going to get this thing done because October 5th, the book is due. And 4 women told me the same thing when I was talking with them. So Lynn Twist was one of them. I had interviewed her for her thoughts about healing, and Nilima, my co-author on Shakti Leadership, and they all said, "You're writing a book about healing. What about your own healing?" And I said, "Well, I don't have time for that. I've got a book deadline in October. I don't have any time for that." I said, "Besides, I think I'm okay. I don't think I need any healing." I said, "No, everybody needs healing, and you do. And you cannot write a book about healing unless you actually work on your own healing. That would be just wrong and kind of dishonest, you know." So fortunately, I had the wisdom to listen to them. I delayed that book by 5 months to February. And I then said yes to a number of opportunities. So going to the high Himalayas on a Shakti, we do these Shakti spiritual journeys. So in the region between India and Tibet, where the deep Buddhist wisdom resides. And that's where I had my 60th birthday. And there's so much to learn about suffering and about healing there. I went to a silent retreat in upstate New York with Peter Senge and David Ryder and some of my heroes. And I had already said no, and I said, "No, okay, actually, I'm going to come." And those 4 days were extraordinary. If you haven't, or the listeners haven't experienced a silent retreat, I strongly urge them to do that. And in those 4 days, I had like 45 pages of notes because I was walking around in nature with my journal, and so many things came to me. So many things in my life started to make sense. I started connecting the dots. It all kind of clicked. And actually, I got an outline of these steps, which I'm writing another book now, based upon that. Know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, etc., which is kind of I'm calling it a way for healing leaders, the 7 steps to recovery of self. So that
Mm.
was extraordinary. And then I went to the Amazon rainforest with Lindquist and the Pachamama Alliance. They take groups of people to Ecuador, and you're deep inside the rainforest with the Achuar and the Zapara people, and you spend 10 days with the shamans in the rainforest. And included within that was an ayahuasca experience, which is the psychedelic brew that they have been brewing for thousands of years in the rainforest. And that turned out to be a profound experience, which I can share if you like later. But I received so much wisdom from somewhere about healing. And I actually got kind of a prescription for healing. This is what you need, and this is what the world needs in order to heal. So all of that was going on, starting in 2018, the recognition of my need for healing, the realization that I had never really been happy in my life as a child, as a young adult, for various reasons, and it's all in the book. I had a very troubled relationship with my father. I didn't know him until I was 7. I came from a very, very feudal, very sort of uh, uh, difficult childhood and background with a lot of conflict and a lot of abuse that happened. I had a very, very difficult marriage. I had a very special needs son, So I was like, no peace of mind and no happiness. And so I realized, starting in 2018, that I need to work on my own being and, you know, figure out what it means to be happy and how do
Mm.
I get there. And I need to acknowledge and recognize my wounds and traumas. I had traumas, and like all of us, I minimized them. I said, I didn't go to Afghanistan or I wasn't a first responder. So what right do I have to complain about my little wounds, here and there? And we all do that. We minimize our own wounds and traumas because there's always much more suffering out there in the world, right? But the fact is that all pain matters, right? All trauma matters. And all of us, every human being, I believe, so has some degree of post-traumatic stress injury. We may not have PTSD as a diagnosed condition. I believe about 13 million Americans have that. But I believe all of us have, because life is hard, life is traumatic. Things happen to every child. There are many things that happen to each of us that are distinct, but there's personal trauma, there's things that happen to us directly, there are things that happen in our family of origin, there's things that happen in our ancestry, right? In our lineage. Epigenetics is telling us that things that may have happened 4 generations ago are still impacting your behavior, and you have irrational fear of certain things. It's probably from something that happened back then. And there's the collective trauma of the climate change and the pandemic and some of the political stuff that we've been living through. Those are all traumatic things. So there's so much trauma, and we have to move towards healing. And so I also experienced multiple plant journeys that year. That was the beginning of my experimentation with MDMA and mushrooms and all of these things. I think have something to offer. Not exclusively, there are many modalities now available for people to heal with trauma. We were with Gabor Mate last year in Blue Spirit in Costa Rica, and he's one of the great experts. And along with Bessel van de Kolk, who wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And we have a list of 20 things now, EMDR, the eye movement thing, there's compassionate inquiry, there's many, many things. So that was the beginning of the healing journey for me. And as I went through all of those things, I just realized that this is something I need to share, because it's one thing we learn our lessons after 60, 65 years, it's like, what have I learned late in life that I can share with people who are early in their life? Because we alone among all the species on this planet can learn from each other's experience, right? Everybody else, anybody can learn from their own experience, but human beings are capable of learning from other people's experience. So we read a book like Man's Search for Meaning. It changes your life, right? Just somebody 60, 70, 80 years ago. So I think we have that. So I almost felt an obligation to write that. And the other thing is, in my 14 books up to that point, I had never, ever written about myself. My books were all about being objective and being an academic and being an observer and telling other people's stories. So I never used the I pronoun. And now I realize that actually the most powerful books that I have read are actually the ones like Man's Search for Meaning, like Synchronicity by Joseph Jaworski, and so many others. They're the ones where the author shares of their own experience. I think it was Carl Rogers who said that which is deeply personal is also completely universal. And so each of us can learn lessons from the other's journey. And so that was the spirit in which I started to then write that book, because it's been an unusual life and there's been a lot of pain and suffering in it. But I think there's something that redeems it. And I have, compared to many, I have the good fortune of at least finding my purpose and doing something meaningful with my life in that dimension. But that's not all of it. So therefore, the inner peace and the healing. So I want to tell people, finding your purpose is not the end of the journey. It's sort of the beginning of living your life now in the way that you're intended to.
Wow. So very inspiring, Raj. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I have so many more questions, but let's hear some questions from our participants, and please make your question brief, and we'll respond also relatively briefly because we do want to hear from as many of you as possible. So Keith, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah. I'll be as succinct as I can. Don't you think that capitalism, really marketing, to be at its most effective, is not just caring for employees as well as customers, but acting philanthropically? And to give you one specific example of what I mean is in the Cromwell Life Sciences, science parks attached to universities where the companies gain from their interaction with academics at the cutting edge of innovation and at the same time invest. So it's very mutual.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm getting the question, Keith. Marketing is at its best.
Well, I'm basically saying that companies, to be really effective is caring capitalism, and that they have to act philanthropically. I mean, many of the most successful companies have foundations of their own, but you can see with life sciences, and particularly during COVID and the development of vaccines, the importance of science parks, interrelationship with universities.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think we have to be philanthropic. But one of the things that in the past, before conscious capitalism, we had a lot of companies that were operating in ways that were causing harm to their employees, that were damaging the environment, that were even doing some things unethically with their customers. And they had the foundations, right? And they were giving money away for worthy causes. But meanwhile, they're causing suffering. So I don't want it to be that you're causing suffering in the core business, and then you're somehow, this is the whole corporate social responsibility movement. It was about alleviating the very suffering that you're causing. So you're a food company and you're producing all this addictive, unhealthy food and getting hooked on it and causing obesity. And then you put some money into anti-obesity education. Well, that's not, that is a Band-Aid, and that's really marketing in the worst way, that you're just trying to create some positive PR. Right? So let's not cause the harm in the first place. I would rather a company spend zero on philanthropy and yet have a business that is fundamentally aligned with the well-being of all of its stakeholders, right? Why do we have 2 million plus NGOs in the world? Because they're cleaning up the mess that we are creating in business. Why is there so much, suffering of different kinds? Because the way in which we work and manage our businesses is creating all of that suffering in many ways. So I think it's much better. But ideally, yes, Whole Foods does all of that, and they have 6 different foundations. The Whole Planet Foundation, which is about micro lending to farmers to become to shift from chemical to natural and organic. They have the Whole Kids Foundation to change the school lunch program and give healthy food. The Whole Cities Foundation to bring healthy food to inner cities, the food deserts. The Global Animal Partnership to change the way animals are treated in the factory farming system, which is a daily holocaust that goes on. The extraordinary pain and suffering that we put animals through to feed our appetites. Tal, at one point, the last year and a half, I had to come to the realization that I am not in integrity and I'm not in alignment when I talk about love and compassion and healing and consciousness. And then I go and buy some factory farmed meat, right? So I've decided I've become vegetarian now because I cannot abide, because all of that cruelty and all that suffering doesn't disappear when that animal dies. It's here, so energetically, it's here. So we cannot be part of the suffering. Can we live? And somebody mentioned that they wanted to hear me talk about what I learned in the Amazon rainforest. I'll say it very quickly. One of my many visions was I got this 4 letters floating in my vision. And it came as an acronym. I love to make acronyms, and it came as the list. And the voice in my head was saying, this is the list. This is what the world needs in order to heal. And it was love, innocence, simplicity, and truth. That we need to live with love. Everything we do must come from love, not fear, not greed. So many business decisions are rooted in fear and greed, right? Not anger, not jealousy. Innocence, we are all born innocent, and then we get corrupted by the ways of the world. We learn to use our intelligence not to take care of each other and serve each other, but to climb over each other. And we learn to lie and cheat to get what we want. Can we return to that state of innocence? We don't have a choice as a child, but as an adult, you do have a choice and therefore a responsibility to choose to live with innocence. What does that mean? I will not knowingly be the source of suffering for another, of unnecessary suffering, right? And for me now that includes the suffering of animals, right? So living with innocence and thinking about where am I not doing that? And simplicity, we make things too complicated. The most essential things are simple. And truth. What is our commitment to the truth? We live in an age of alternative facts, and truth has lost all meaning, right? And in marketing, certainly we never talk about truth, right? What is the truth? But truth is fundamental. Truth is more fundamental than peace, because without truth there can be no peace. Right? That's why in South Africa we have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, right? At the end of apartheid, unless they acknowledge the truth of what had happened under that horrific system and the way people had suffered, unless the people acknowledged that they were part of that system and they begged forgiveness for their role in it, then you can move forward and you can have peace. But if you do not acknowledge it, you cannot, which is why in this country we keep having eruptions of pain, right? George Floyd being one of the more recent ones, right? Where we haven't healed our past. And that's the amazing opportunity we have as humans. In the present moment, we can heal the past. All it takes is acknowledging the truth and atoning for it and owning it, owning up to our role in it or our ancestors' role in it. Yeah, I didn't cause that suffering. I didn't own slaves, but yeah, I'm the beneficiary of that system that is cascaded through the generations, right? So we can heal by connecting. So in this moment, we can heal the past, we can heal the present, and we can create the conditions for healing in the future. So that was the list that came to me that night, and I think it was a message through me. I'm still trying to interpret everything that it means.
So love, innocence, simplicity, and truth, the list. Thank you for that. Thank you, Keith, for the question. Victoria, you can unmute yourself, please. Okay, let's move on to Danny. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Tal. Hello, Raj. I'm wondering, it's beautiful what you say, that, for example, thinking about my country, Mexico, I am wondering how people can start changing the way it is happening, like all the situation between drugs, poverty, corruption, like where does the change start to change? Because I would say with me, of course, but then what else comes, right? So please, I would love to know what your perspective is in this, like for a country change, let's say.
Well, so I am in Mexico now. I mean, this is where my job is. And I'm with Tecnológico de Monterrey because I think they have an opportunity to impact change at a national scale and beyond. because of their 26 campuses and their extraordinary reach with alumni. And their board of trustees is like 30% of the GDP of this country, and their alumni include many of the business leaders. And so, starting to change the consciousness, and we can work in our sector. So for us, it's the business sector. The way business operates has a huge impact on the quality of our life and our environment and everything else. So we are steadily working with Mexican businesses. We're probably going to do about 10 of these programs this year, Journeys to Conscious Capitalism. We take about 10 companies at a time through a 2-day experience, and they start to embark on this journey, and then we actually offer consulting to them as well through the university. So we're trying to change, it one business at a time, but we're also going to be working with the government to say what policy changes can be implemented that will. What we have right now, especially in the US, a lot of incentives for the old way of doing business. We're subsidizing tobacco, and we're subsidizing fossil fuels, and we're subsidizing corn and some of these other things, which is leading to all of the high fructose corn syrup and all the unhealthy stuff. All the unhealthy stuff is quite subsidized, and the healthy stuff is not. So at least remove some of those obstacles. So I think it's going to take all of those things, but ultimately, if we start doing what we can, and we start in our sphere of span of care, if we start acting in this way, I think ultimately it will ripple out. And if we can reach 10% of the people, that is typically a tipping point, right? That starts to change the narrative. What we want to is to change the default setting of what is a business about. Right now, the default is it's about profits and shareholders, value creation. And this is like organic versus natural food. So organic has become a niche, and normal food is the chemical laden food, right? The manufactured food. So we need to switch that. Normal food should be the food that is naturally grown. Likewise, we're trying to do that. So I think, we have to work in our own sectors and bring consciousness. The common denominator is consciousness. Once you are a conscious human being, you will not do all of those things that are causing all of that suffering out there. If we can work on elevating consciousness in our role as parents, as teachers, as community members, and as Gandhi said, you got to be the change, right? So you have to start with yourself. We cannot be preaching what we do not practice. And he says, my life is my message. So our lives have to be that message of peace and tolerance and love and compassion. And if we can model that and start to bring that more and more into the world, I mean, I don't see any other way for change to happen, But thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. Ben.
Hi, Hi, Raj, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My question is related to finding purpose, inner peace, and healing. So my belief is that one can find purpose, inner peace, and healing through the flow state, researched by Mihai, Section Mihai. And earlier you mentioned that you went on a journey to find your purpose, healing, and inner peace through MDMA and mushroom. And I was curious if your experience is similar to the experience that one go in the flow state. Because for me, when you exercise flow state without the drug, you can connect your body, your mind, and wisdom. So I'm just curious to hear more about your experience when it comes to finding purpose, inner peace, and healing.
Right. So the purpose was independent of this, right? Purpose was 2005 when I was writing Forms of Endearment. That's when I connected to my purpose. So it had nothing to do with these things, right? But in terms of the other things, yes, there are many modalities, and I'm not by any means saying that everybody has to try these modalities. These are things that are now becoming available, and in many cases legalized and being researched quite heavily because they're offering promise of relief and to ease the suffering of so many, like military veterans, for example. And so I think flow state, yes, when you're living your purpose and doing work that truly is in harmony with your being, and you kind of lose track of time, and you're just in that deep creative state. Yeah, that is a signal that you are connected to something that is truly your calling in this life. And so that still has to do with purpose. Now, you could come out of that and still be miserable and unhappy, right, with other aspects of your life, and not be able to sleep well at night for other reasons. Right. So for me, what some of these other experiences did, including the mushrooms and so forth, was actually help me start to make sense of my life. So I'll tell you the first experience that I had with MDMA, I kind of saw like watching a movie of my early childhood. And I'm in that village with this feudal system and my grandfather, abusing all of the women and yelling at them and so forth. And the extraordinary levels of abuse that were going on. And it was really a hyper patriarchal, masculine energy, misogynistic kind of a system. It was the warrior caste in India that I was part of. And so I was shown a bunch of things in which there was so much cruelty and so much abuse. And I was literally being shown as a 1-year-old baby in that, in that particular vision. And then the message was, you needed to experience the worst of the hyper masculine patriarchal system so that you would write a book about the feminine 55 years later. If you hadn't experienced this, you would not have the consciousness or the sensibility to write that other book. So I had to experience that so that I would write a book called Shakti Leadership in 2016, right? Because I had experienced the opposite of that, the worst of that. So in that sense, it started to connect the dots. And ultimately, I realized that everything that happened in my life happened for a reason, or we can actually find a meaning in it and say, and therefore in hindsight, so one of my 7 steps is choose your life. And I don't mean choose the future, I mean choose your past. Everything that happened to you, even the worst things that happened to you, I said, okay, I choose it. I choose to be born into that particular caste or that particular community. I choose to have that father with who I had such a difficult relationship. I choose to have that man. I choose to have my special needs son, because then I can grow and learn from it. And life is kind of like that. At my silent retreat, at lunchtime, there was no communication whatsoever. And so at mealtime, you took your tray and there was food behind the counter and 3 or 4 volunteers, and they just put food in your tray. You're not supposed to point to things and say, I want this and not that. No communication, right? So it came to me in that instant that that's kind of a metaphor for life. Life is not a buffet, right? You don't get to say, I'll have this kind of father and that kind of mother and this religion and that socioeconomic status and this time in history. And yeah, you're given a tray full of stuff. Some of it is bitter and some of it looks unappetizing. But this is your curriculum for this lifetime. This is what you need to evolve in this lifetime and then do the work that you're meant to do in this lifetime. You need all of it, right? And when you look at it that way, you cease being a victim and then you become a learner and you say, okay, this is what I know I'm supposed to do with this, right? So every person that you meet, every experience that you have, it's all there for your growth and for your evolution, right? So everybody's a teacher. They're not friend, they're not foe, they're all a teacher. Everybody is a teacher. So I think it's a framing, whether it's true or not, I don't know. But when you frame it in that way, certainly there's some benefit that comes from it.
Raj, it reminds me one of the mantras that we repeat over and over again in our programs is related to life is not a buffet, which is things don't happen for the best, but we can choose to make the best of things that happen. And, things happen for the best. You're a passive optimist, a passive recipient. You're an active agent when you make the best of things that happen. And it sounds like this is the insight that you're describing. I find it also interesting that, you talk about connecting the dots in your life between what you experienced as a 1-year-old and what you did as a 55-year-old. Your work is very much about connecting the dots, not just on the micro level, but also on the macro level. What is conscious capitalism, if not seeing all the stakeholders involved, not just one dot, which is the shareholders? Yeah. And finally, Ben, you asked about flow. And I'm thinking about a concept that Maria Montessori introduced. And she said that healing for the child takes place when he or she experiences normalization. When does that happen? When the child is completely immersed in an activity. So they spend, 3 hours just playing with a certain toy or trying to figure out something. And that normalization, the state of flow, is what heals us. Natalia.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you for the talk, and thank you for this opportunity. So I've moved now from working for the big business as a lawyer into big state organization, which is London Police. And I've seen, comparing two systems, in my point of view, business is much more conscious than the civil service, let's say.
Yeah.
Definitely than the police. And one of the, no, my aim to join the police, apart from anything else, was to bring happiness into there and through there into communities. Because I can see now already working, because I'm still a probationer now. I have to work in the front line, which I actually started hating. I can see that unhappy policing, unhappy police policing unhappy society or unhappy communities, because majority of our clientele are really, truly unhappy people, as you can understand. So my question to you is, could we start conscious state service? Could we do something about conscious policing? Because I think that's what we really need to change.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you could apply that, word to any sector. We need conscious everything: conscious education, conscious government, conscious marketing, conscious finance, conscious manufacturing. Acting with consciousness rather than compulsiveness, right, is all the difference. And when we start being conscious, then every single thing that we do, we're going to do in a different way, right? So I agree that that's exactly what we have to do. And how do we do it? I think it starts with education. We don't get taught the important things in our school systems, right? We're only taught the things that are going to ultimately allow us to do some kind of basic jobs. But we have to actually focus on how do we live, school for living, right? Kind of the work that you're doing, but really for kindergartners, right? We have to learn these things early on, and I don't think we do that. Maybe certain kinds of Montessori or others might do some of that, but I do think that is the common element with consciousness. And when your consciousness expands, it's like, if you got a match, you light a match, you only see this much, and then you have a flashlight, you see this much, and then you turn on the light and you see the whole picture. And you say, wow, what I was doing before was completely wrong because I didn't see all of these other things. So the more we expand our consciousness, the bigger and bigger picture that we see, and we start to see the consequences of our actions on others and over time. And once we do that, and then we become accountable for those consequences, and therefore we have to change. So yeah, I think all of that is needed. The other perspective on this, which Gabor Mate beautifully articulates, we have so much pain and so much suffering and so much addiction and so much mental illness and so forth, and we criminalize a lot of that, right? People who are on drugs, they are prosecuted and so forth. And he doesn't ask. He said, why? He doesn't ask why the addiction. He says, why the pain? What is the pain? What is our society creating that is causing people to do all of these things? His new book, The Myth of Normal, is exactly about that. He said, if you are well adapted to a culture that is deeply toxic, then that is not healthy, actually. It is unhealthy to be fully adapted to a culture that is as toxic as our culture is right now, right? And so that is the myth of normal. So we have to, start to change the way in which we look at so many of these things and go the underneath. What is the pain? What's causing people to suffer to the extent? The opioid crisis, 100,000 people die every year in this country, right? In the US, so much pain. And I've learned, the mind-body connection. So much of it is emotionally rooted. It is not because you're, something physically, structurally is wrong with your body. In many cases, in majority of cases, in fact, it is rooted in unexpressed emotions, suppressed anger, or traumas that you experienced that you never healed.
Mhm. Wow. Thank you, Raj. So we are actually out of time, but let's take one more question with your permission, Raj. Is that okay?
Sure.
And then we'll have to unfortunately say goodbye. So Philip.
Yes, thank you so much for the conversation, and great to see you, Raj and Tal, for hosting this. So my question is around the connecting of the dots. So for me, I feel like I'm embedded with the doubters as a well-being consultant, and I do reference your work, Raj, and I try to look for bright spots to illuminate and try to pull people into better practices that feel like they're aligned with where they are, like incentives, right? The incentives for short-term gain are where lots of things are aligned. You know, you help to make the business case for aligning doing good deeds to raise all boats. I'm wondering, how do you feel about ESG constructs as a way to begin to help publicly traded companies and business leaders who maybe are on the fence to come a little closer to doing some better things for their people?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. But conscious capitalism is that plus many more things, right? So it's not equivalent to conscious capitalism. When you're a conscious business, you're going to do those things automatically as a part of what you do, because they're all stakeholders, right? The environment is a stakeholder, society is a stakeholder, etc. What's happening, I think, with ESG is it's kind of becoming an outside in rather than an inside out process. So you're being asked or mandated to do certain things in certain countries, or you're expected to do certain things, and therefore you lose kind of that intrinsic motivation, the reason why you're doing it. It becomes a compliance issue, as Neha talks about, my partner. You know, is it something that is an inspiration or an obligation? If you do things from inspiration, they have such power and beauty to them. If you do things out of obligation, it's just checking the box, and you don't really mean it, and your heart isn't in it, and you're just going to try to find the loopholes, and you're going to create a nice looking report, but ultimately it's not really real. And so I think operating from inspiration and not obligation, even when it comes to things like ESG, and not stopping there. Right? That is a framework. It's a useful framework, but it's not the whole story of what needs to change.
Thank you. Wow. Raj, I'm so glad you found your purpose in bringing more purpose to life for so many people, myself included. I remember talking about your book to one of my mentors, whom you, of course, know, Warren Bennis.
Oh, yeah.
And when Warren Bennis was a business school professor and one of the founders of the field of leadership studies. And I'd asked him years ago, why, Warren, did you choose to go into business? He seemed to me, you know, much more suitable for, you know, a school of psychology or a literature department. You know, he would quote Shakespeare. And he said to me, I went into business school because it's business that can change our world for the better. And when we talked about it, he talked about how conscious capitalism articulates just how it can do that. So I know he was a fan, I'm a fan, and more than that, so many of us are grateful for the important work that you did and continue to do to awakening our society, the individual, and the collective. So thank you, Raj, for being with us, and thank you all for being here too.
Thank you so much, Tal. It's really a delight to spend time with you, and I know we're going to be able to spend more time with you at the summit and in London at the World Happiness Summit again. So looking forward to that and continuing to learn from you. Every time I see you and hear you, I learn something more. So thank you for what you do and what you have dedicated your life to, which is extraordinary.
Right. Thank you. Take care, everyone, of yourselves and others. Bye-bye.
Y estoy sumamente entusiasmada y agradecida por ser parte del HSA Happiness Studies Academy.
We are around the world with different time zones, with different language cultures. We are people from 70 countries all over the world.
Y realmente es un regalo que yo me he hecho para crecer cada vez más como persona.
Então, como nós cuidamos das dimensões espirituais, físicas, intelectuais, relacionais e emocionais em nossas vidas.
This experience really gave me tools that I could teach other people with that are just across the board, whether it's your business, whether it's your relationships, whether it's your life, whether it's your health.
הקורס מתאים להורים, למאמנים, לפסיכולוגים, לאנשי חינוך, למנהלים ובעצם לכל מי שרוצה להעלות את הרווחה הנפשית והפיזית על ידי ידע תיאורטי וכלים פרקטיים.
Entonces, pues se trata de esparcir felicidad justo en momentos como estos que históricamente es altamente necesario. Y si lo estás dudando, no lo dudes, te lo recomiendo ampliamente, no te vas a arrepentir.
非常希望你们也能参加这个幸福学院，因为我在这收获很大。
So we can work together to make a happiness tribe. Why? So that we can work together to make the world a happier place.
Únete y sé parte de nuestra familia para ser más felices. Happiness Stories Academy. Te necesitamos. Ven.